Good evening, and welcome to the African American Museum in Philadelphia. On behalf of our board and our staff and myself, acting as President and CEO, Dr. Ashley Jordan, it is my happy privilege to introduce you all to our kickoff celebration for Black History Month, an evening conversation with Dr. Hasan Jefferies, our special guest coming by way of Ohio, which is also my birthplace. So the Buckeyes are here today, and we are so excited for this very important conversation. One of the things for the museum, we know that we celebrate Black History 365 days of the year, but because of Black History Month in February and its special designation, we like to give special attention for this celebration to commemorate those unsung, forgotten, and lesser known champions of African American history, but as well to give attentional details to those who paved the way for us to be here today. And so without further ado, I will give this program over to our new Executive Vice President, Christopher Miller, who will direct us further in our program. So at this time, I'll give it to Chris.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. I want to thank all of you for being here today and joining us. We hope that you visit our website, AAMP. museum.org, to see the breadth of programming that we have coming throughout the rest of the month, as well as our exhibits that we have here. And so don't be a stranger, not just for tonight, but come back and visit us. Before I go any further, I definitely want to thank our sponsors with TD Bank for their generosity in helping us to put on this program that's here today. And so definitely want to thank those associated with TD Bank and for their generosity. And so I know that you didn't come here to hear me speak, but I definitely want to navigate how we will go. So we will have a lecture portion, and that will follow up with a discussion that we will have on stage here. And then we will allow a few minutes after that discussion between Dr. Jefferies and myself to entertain questions from the audience, okay? I want to make sure that, as we go through this, and you will see in the presentation, that we want to give the proper respect and honor to Carter G. Woodson, who was the father of Black history, and the reason why there's even a Black History Month that exists. And one of the things that put a fire in his belly, as I think I heard Dr. Jordan use today, fire in your belly, is that he was told that Black people here in America do not have a history. And so he was charged to make sure that people who don't have a history or acknowledge or learn from their history, that can cause irreparable harm and damage. So he was important to understand that we have contributions in this country by many Black pioneers that deserves emphasis, that merits our attention, and deserves to be a part of the American narrative. And so that's what we're doing here today, this evening. And so Dr. Hasan Kwame Jefferies is the College of Arts and Science Alumni Associate Professor of History at the Ohio State University. I put the "the" on there, all right? Where he teaches courses in the civil rights and Black Power movement. Hasan was born in Brooklyn, New York, and graduated summa cum laude from Morehouse College with a BA in history. At Morehouse, he was initiated into the Phi chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. He earned a PhD in American history with a specialization in African American history from Duke University. He taught at the University of Alabama before joining the faculty at Ohio State. Hasan is the author of Bloody Lounge, Civil Rights and Black Power in Alabama's Black Belt, which tells the remarkable story of the African American freedom movement in Alabama, there in Lowndes County. Am I saying that right, Lowndes? Yes. There's a wonderful documentary that he was a part of that unpacks that story as well. He is the editor of Understanding and Teaching the Civil Rights Movement, a collection of essays by leading civil rights scholars and teachers that explores how to teach the civil rights movement accurately and effectively. Hasan has been a contributor on many documentaries. Recently, he was a part of Fight the Power, the 50 Years of Hip Hop. and how hip hop changed the world. So he was a part of that documentary as well as a host of others. He regularly shares his knowledge about African American history on many different outlets, lectures, workshops, op-eds, radio, television interviews. So it's just a pleasure to have him here at the African American Museum in Philadelphia. Please help me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Hasan Jefferies.
Well, good evening, and thank you very much, Brother Chris, for the warm words of introduction, Dr. Jordan for extending the invitation to be here, Brother Miller failed to mention that we just lost him in the Buckeye State in Ohio. He had been there working with us with the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center and been doing wonderful work for 20 years, just about almost 20 years. So our loss was Philadelphia's gain. And so when Brother Miller reached out and asked if I would be a part of the opening of Black History Month here in Philadelphia, it was a no-brainer. It was an absolute yes. One of the last things that we did together down back in Ohio, back in the great state of Ohio. Look, I don't make up the Ohio State. That's what it says on the checks, the "the." So as long as it says the "the," we got to say it. But it was, and he had put this together, a celebration, commemoration, thinking about hip hop and the 50th anniversary. So we got together last summer. It was myself, a couple other scholars, and Big Daddy Kane, for those who may be connoisseurs of hip hop. And then both Chris and I realized that we are the same age as hip hop. We both turned 50 at the time, so this was we were very excited to be able to have that dialogue and to be in the presence. And this last thing, because we're actually going to begin by talking a little bit about hip hop as we talk about African Americans and art. You know you're old school and you know you appreciate hip hop when Brother Miller, when I showed up and I'm looking at the stage and he was like, "Hasan, this is what I got." He brought out the old cassette tapes, right? That had the Big Daddy Kane and these others and laid them out. He was like, "All right, this is who we are. This is how we begin." It was the roots. So it was the spirit was there, and that spirit of authenticity is what he carries with him, and it really shines bright. So congratulations to the African American Museum in Philadelphia, but really the Philadelphia community. You have a bright star who's here, who's going to be with you for quite a while. So congratulations. African Americans and the arts. This is every year the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, founded by Carter G. Woodson in 1915, originally as the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. And Carter G. Woodson, as was mentioned, is the sort of father of Black history, generally speaking, but certainly the person who was the progenitor of Negro History Week that then evolves to Black History Week, Black History Month. And they choose a theme. Every year they choose a theme for the focus of what Black History Month should be. And this year's theme is African Americans and the arts, African Americans and the arts. Now, of course, African Americans have made contributions in all fields of human endeavor, whether we're talking about the arts or sciences, whatever you have, whatever you can imagine, Black folk have made a contribution. But I'm really excited about sharing some thoughts and ideas and then carrying on the conversation about African Americans and the arts, because the arts, in a very real way, embody life itself, right? I mean, how we think about art, the way in which art manifests itself, is really symbolic of how African Americans have experienced and expressed life themselves. As I was saying earlier, born in Brooklyn, New York, 51 years ago, 1973, literally the year that we say hip-hop was born. I am part of that hip-hop generation. And if you know a little bit about hip-hop, there's a way of thinking about it, right? Like hip hop is certainly music, right? But hip hop, just like art itself and the African American sort of artistic aesthetic, is very much about life. And so Africa Bambaataa, which is one of the originators, early hip hop artists, was a deep thinker, a philosophical thinker, and he was one of the very first people to identify what others have called the four elements, and many will say a fifth element, but the four elements of hip hop, the four elements of hip hop. So when sometimes we reduce hip hop to just rap lyrics, right? But the one element. So in that first corner and that left-hand quadrant, you have the DJ, one element, right? The DJ who's spinning. And if you know sort of the origins of hip hop, you think about DJ Kool Herc, which was one of bringing over that steel drum sound and the influence in the Caribbean, so really taking root. So the DJ is really at the heart and the anchor. Folk like DJ Tron, you understand, Jim Pollard. Then you have the MC, right? The MC. This is the rapper, right? This is the lyricist. And then the third. I like the chemical symbols here, right? Breakdancing, right? I mean, thinking about early on and the brothers and sisters too, in the streets of New York and the Bronx and the Queens, laying out the cardboard on the streets and introducing a new style of dance, right? Breakdancing. And then the fourth, the spray can, symbolizing graffiti, right? But graffiti not as nuisance, graffiti as artistic expression, graffiti as letting the world know that we exist, that I am, and specifically in a place like New York City, tagging, if you will, marking your name on subways. We've seen the images. Some have lived through the images of subway trains marked with graffiti, but that was not by accident, right? I mean, it's if you yourself as a black youth or Latino youth, Puerto Rican youth, trapped in the Bronx, but your tag is traveling throughout the city, right? The subways made you mobile even when life and conditions did not. So these four elements, the DJ, which is the sound, right? Which is the ear, the MC, which is the voice, the lyrics, the lyricist, the breakdancing is the body, the movement, and then finally the graffiti, the graffiti artist is the visual expression. Africa Bambaataa was right. These are the four elements that really capture the essence of not just hip hop, but hip hop culture. But they really reflect something much deeper and much more profound. They reflect the African American artistic expression, like across time. All four of these elements are reproduced and replicated over time and time again, and for very specific purposes. The other thing that we have to think about, and I'll say a few words during this time, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about it later, is one of the core elements of black artistic expression is that black folk just don't engage in art for the sake of art. Ain't nothing wrong with that. You want to paint some flowers, that's cool. But there's always been this tradition of artistic expression for purpose. Right? Given the conditions that black folk have found themselves in, struggling and fighting against white supremacy, fighting for freedom, fighting for a literal freedom from slavery, and then afterwards fighting for the right to have equality, the art has been an expression of their political beliefs and this struggle. And this is not new. This is a painting, depiction of the Stono Rebellion, 1739 in South Carolina, Stono, South Carolina. Enslaved African Americans rise up in one of the largest rebellions, enslaved insurrections in U.S. history. One of the largest enslaved insurrections in U.S. history. And as they rise up, they wind up taking out a couple enslavers. You know, one of the things one of the questions that I get as a teacher at The Ohio State University, brilliant students, sometimes they come up a little short, but brilliant students at The Ohio State University, and they ask me, say, well, Dr. Jefferies, if, you know, one of the core elements of the African-American experience, not just artistic expression, but the African-American experience, is the persistence of resistance. The persistence of resistance. There is never a time in the black experience where black people are not fighting for equality, fighting for freedom. There's never a time. The persistence of resistance. So they say, well, Dr. Jefferies, if you say that there's persistence of resistance, you always have black folk fighting, then why weren't there more enslaved rebellions in the United States? Why weren't there more enslaved rebellions? I say it's a good question, but it's the wrong question. The right question is, given the conditions that black folk were facing in terms of demographic numbers and the like, the question is not why weren't there more, is why were there any in the first place? Because an enslaved rebellion was suicide. This is not Jamaica. This is not Haiti. You do not have the numbers. Black folk are outnumbered, outgunned in every single situation. In South Carolina, in Stono, what you could do on a large rice plantation, where you have 300 or 400 enslaved African Americans, you could take out the handful of white people on that plantation. And that's what they did. And then you'll be able to get to a couple more plantations and take out some more white folk. And that's what they did too. That's what Nat Turner did in Southampton, Virginia. But eventually, once the alarm is sounded, you're no longer dealing with a couple plantations and white folk who are armed on those plantations. Now you're dealing with the county militia. If you get past the county militia, you're going to have to deal with the colonial militia. You get past the colonial militia at the time, you're going to have to deal with the British Army and later on with the U.S. Army. I mean, so you were outnumbered, outgunned. But despite that, 1739, these black folk are going to fight for their freedom. Fight for their freedom. They take out a couple white folk, and then they start to march south. They're in South Carolina. They're headed towards Florida. Florida, at the time, was a Spanish possession. It was a Spanish colony. The Spanish were there. Spanish ain't like the British. British ain't like the Spanish. We don't take black folk seriously enough as political thinkers, even enslaved black folk. These enslaved black folk in Stono, South Carolina, rise up and start marching towards Florida because they know that the word has come out from Florida that if you are an enslaved person and you escape from South Carolina, we will give you refuge in Florida because the Spanish understand that that will help undermine British power in the colony. So these black folk rise up, enslaved Africans rise up and start marching towards Florida. But they just can't march quietly. And this is why the power of this image is so important, and it speaks to that first element. These folk gonna start marching and drumming, right? Marching and drumming, declaring their freedom and their presence, which I can appreciate, but strategically, it's probably not the best move, right? And they had a ways to go. And unfortunately, and not surprisingly, because rebellion was suicide. It literally was suicide. Local white militia, county authorities catch up and massacre those who were a part of the Stonewall Rebellion. I mean, the savagery of that they wield against these freedom fighters. I mean, they're decapitating people, putting their heads on pikes and then lining the roads all the way back to Stono. I mean, this was how enslavers, this is how white colonists responded to the efforts of African Americans to fight for freedom. We're going to send a message. But just go back. While the drumming wasn't the wisest of moves, it spoke to that first element, the music, the sound, right? Sending a message. We've heard the rumors of, drum speak, right? Or the folk tales of drum speak. and certainly bringing over that African tradition of drumming and messaging. And this was that, sending the message to others, calling others to come and join this march towards freedom. It's part of that resistance. This is black art, expressed for a revolutionary purpose. And that wasn't lost on those who were trying to deny African Americans their freedom. Because one of the things that happens as a direct result of the Stono Rebellion is that in 1741, just 2 years later, South Carolina will rewrite what it calls its slave code. And one of the things that it does, makes it a crime to drum, makes it a crime to speak, makes that first element a crime. Because there was an understanding that there was revolutionary power and potential in this musical artistic expression. Stono Rebellion. If we fast forward that second element and seeing how it manifests itself not just in hip-hop music, but in black art, I'm drawn to one of my favorite poems from we say the Harlem Renaissance. The author Claude McKay was a Harlem Renaissance poet, but this actually comes a little bit earlier, in 1919. In the summer of 1919, Red Summer, when there is just a slew of racial massacres that are dotting the American landscape. In 1919, James Weldon Johnson, another African-American activist and the author, along with his brother, of the Negro national anthem, the African-American national anthem, dubs this Red Summer. And as Claude McKay is reading about what's happening, the massacres that are being visited upon African-American communities, not coincidentally, and this is not just a Southern thing, right? I mean, this is in the Midwest, this is in the Northeast, this is out West, and this is also in direct response to African-Americans coming back, African-American men coming back after World War I. And this is an attempt to put the black community in its place. We think about certainly in sort of hip-hop and early hip-hop coming out of the Northeast, lyrics and lyricism is really at the heart and soul of what defines that particular expression of hip-hop. Folk like Nas, who I appreciate, but Nas ain't never give me If We Must Die, right? He's an extension of that. You never get If We Must Die. Claude McKay saying, I mean, think just the lyrics for those who can't see it. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, this is that revolutionary spirit. Like, why weren't there more rebellions? Well, we know what the end result is going to be. And what Claude McKay is saying, the lyricist, if you will, if we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. Like, you will respect us even as we fight and lose our lives. O kinsmen, this is a call to black folk. This is the other thing that is so important when we think about black artistic expression and whether we're talking about in terms of poetry or oratory and speech making, that there are times when black folk are speaking to a broader population, right? Black artistic expression aimed at a particular audience sometimes is for white folk. The difference between Dr. King and Malcolm X, Dr. King was often talking to white people. Malcolm X was often talking to black folk. Claude McKay is talking to black folk. Now, he's also saying white folk, y'all need to pay attention, right? But this is a message to black folk. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe, though far outnumbered let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men will face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. I mean, that stretches across the generations. I mean, that informs and influences, that spirit. Sometimes the words themselves, I mean, we will hear people reciting Claude McKay, if we must die for generations. But sometimes, even if you don't know the words, you feel the spirit. And that spirit is captured time and time and time again. That second element that we identify with hip hop has deep roots within the African American experience. 1968, in Mexico City, Tommy Smith and John Carlos finished first and third in the 200 meters, win gold and bronze, and as they take the stand, the Olympic stand, to receive their medals, each wearing a black fist, raise their hands. You can't see it in this, in solidarity with black folk and the Black Power, not just the Black Power movement, but black people who are fighting for freedom. And what's so powerful, obviously this becomes sort of the iconic image of the late 1960s and the Black Power era. But what you don't see in this photo actually is their feet, because they're not wearing their shoes. They're not wearing their spikes. They took them off. They walk up barefoot, socks on, but barefoot, essentially. And they said they did that because they wanted to draw attention to the struggle against poverty in America and beyond. So this was their expression of solidarity. Wasn't just simply rooted in a very sort of narrow sense around race, but saying how can we affect this? It's a political statement, but it's also a statement about economics. These are the breakdancers. This is the body, right? The body used for political purpose, excelling in sport in this instance, but saying that my body ought to express and reflect my beliefs and my political beliefs. Just as we would see those who were engaged in breakdancing as a part of this hip-hop culture was a critique of the society and American culture at the time, 1980s, Reaganomics and the like, so too were these black athletes here and before. Whether we're talking about a Jackie Robinson 20 years earlier, desegregating baseball, and then going on to not only excel on the diamond, but for 15 years after he retires, being an activist in New York City. Certainly a Muhammad Ali contemporaneously with these two Olympians. Right? The black body and its expression we have to look at and interpret, not just for its artistic appeal, not just for entertainment, but always the political purposes and the political meanings and the political expressions that are often bound up in it. The fourth element, the visual, the graphic design. This is one of the samples of artwork from Emory Douglas. Emory Douglas was the minister, I forget the exact title, minister of, I don't think it's either information or communication, whatever it was cool. Minister of Information and Communication for the Black Panther Party out of Oakland, California. And essentially he was in charge of the Black Panther newspaper. And one of the things that he does is these amazing drawings, this amazing artwork within the Black Panther newspaper. And again, visual art for a express political purpose in the effort to secure freedom. In the Black Panther newspaper, one of the things he talks about, Emory Douglas, who's still around, and you can find the powerful political artwork that he did in the Black Panther paper, is collected in various volumes, and you can find them online and the like. But it was this revolutionary ethos, and he's like, this is how we're going to reach the people. All right, so again, not art just for art's sake. I mean, one of the key elements that really set the black experience and black art apart is that it's always been connected to this political purpose. Not all the time, not 100%, nothing is 100%, but so deeply embedded, right, in the artistic expression and certainly in the visual arts. We see time and time again black artists using their talent to make a political point, to advance the cause of fighting for freedom. And I think there is a few better who really do that than somebody like Emory Douglas, who really took it to a next level in the 60s and early 1970s. The visual, that fourth element. So many will say that we have these four elements of hip hop that I argue have these long, like Vincent Harding's There Is a River. I mean, it's winding through the entirety of the black experience. But many will also say that there's a fifth element. There's a fifth element, and the fifth element is knowledge. Right? So we have the artistic expressions, those four components, but then they say that there's a fifth element. The fifth element is knowledge. And I think that is true. Right? I mean, it's Carter G. Woodson who has brought us together here today. Right? So even in each of, as we look at black art, there's this constant communication between past and present, right? Where the artist is familiar and drawing on the black experience, whether consciously or unconsciously, and sharing it out, teaching through the art, through that political expression. So I think that fifth element is real. And I think that fifth element is really the glue that binds the four together. It gives those four meaning and purpose in the expression. Carter G. Woodson understood that. Marcus Garvey understood that. The Universal Negro Improvement Association, political organization, Black Nationalist Organization, has the Negro world. And what's in the Negro world is full of poetry. W.E.B. Du Bois, editor of the Crisis magazine for the NAACP, forever writing plays, right? Artistic expression. James Weldon Johnson, political activist, poet, songwriter, writing play. The artistic knowledge of the past being transmitted through the artistic expression in the present. So when we think about African Americans and art, I hope we will pause to appreciate not just the artistic expression, not even sort of the contemporary commentary that sometimes they offer, but I hope we'll appreciate the broader context out of which black art emerges, out of which black artists emerge. The work that black art has always tried to do. And that work is trying to make the world a safer and better place for black folk and for all who inhabit it. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, I wanted this portion of the program tonight to be unscripted, to be very organic, and so there's only one thing I asked them if we can talk about, and we'll get to that. But what I wanted to do is somewhat respond off of what Dr. Jefferies shared with us, because he had in conversations with Hasan, he was talking about how to really think about this theme, African Americans and art. And so he, and I will let you know I have Caribbean roots, so I would throw a H on stuff real quickly. So, so you will say, did he say heart, like his heart, or does he say heart? Please apologize, blame my mother on that one. So when I get passionate about it, that's what can happen. But absolutely, I want to, some questions, and I took some notes that are coming down. And I'm going to probably work backwards from what you left off with, because I think it's very critical. You talked about that fifth element, knowledge. A strong argument can be made is that element is under attack, meaning that it's fine for you to sing, dance, and art. But knowledge, that's being attacked. House bills here and there. Can you offer your thoughts on the attack of knowledge?
Well, you made it clear that that's what this is. The attack on critical race theory, the attack on teaching history honestly, is an attack on knowledge. And I think it's important that we put it into contemporary context. So the attack on knowledge is one of the ways in which white supremacy is maintained. This is the reason why in 1741 in South Carolina, they not only say no more drumming, they also say it's now a crime to read and write, to teach enslaved African Americans or free African Americans to read or write. The fear of what knowledge would do. Now, to a certain extent, that's a little different than what we've seen now. And in that history, you have folk who have, 80% of teachers in the United States are white women. 80% of teachers in the United States are white women. And I've done a number of conversations, public K through 12. I've done a number of conversations and workshops with teachers, with white teachers, white women who were like, look, I'm trying to teach this history, but I'm scared. I don't know what to do. How to do this. And I was like, all you got to do is look to what black women have been doing teaching this, because they've been doing it, facing these same odds for generations, having to teach honestly, trying to transmit knowledge in the Jim Crow South when the lost cause narrative was dominant, when you could lose your life for teaching about slavery and lynching and Jim Crow. So we have an example. We have examples within the black cultural tradition, black education tradition of black folk challenging and being successful in transmitting knowledge. One of the things that's different and unique, though, about the moment in which we live and this particular assault on knowledge is that in my humble estimation, as I survey what's going on, the fear now is not that the knowledge will lead to black folk rebelling. The fear is that the knowledge will lead to white folk rebelling. The summer of 2020, think about when this came about. The summer of 2020, we saw the largest protest in U.S. history. It's not even close. June and July, each month, 20 to 30 million people taken to the streets. And these are mostly white people, and mostly young white people taken to the streets, calling for justice for the victims of police violence. We've heard that before. But what we haven't heard before, and this is what some people say, oh, what was so unique about that moment? Was the number of white people? Yeah, that was unique. The size, to be sure. But what was the demand? The demand was a call for an end to systemic racism. That was unique. That was different. Black folk been calling for an end to systemic racism and institution since 1619. We were like, yo, this slavery thing ain't really working out for us. I think we should do away with the system. But to have that many white folk, and young white people in particular, kids, youth, little Kylie, right, marching and then going home to the suburbs and telling mom, we got to do something about systemic racism, that shook those who benefit from the status quo to the core. And those particularly on the political right. And so this then becomes an assault to keep that from happening. They're not so much worried about us. They're worried about what we will transmit to the broader public. And if we are ever able to get the majority to understand this history, then they will have questions. They will absolutely have, and because we saw it. They were like, this systemic racism thing has to go. March for our lives. Something's wrong. Something's not working. And so the knowledge will transform you. These kids, last thing, these kids will, it may not be the last thing, I just threw that in there. These kids, when I get them at Ohio State and elsewhere, look, they come into my classrooms, and when I share the knowledge, they go through these 5 stages of grief, right? They come in, they're like disbelief, they're like, that's not true, that can't be true. Then there's sadness and depression, right? Then they're crying in the classroom and all this other stuff. But then they get to that 5th stage, which is acceptance, right? And as a teacher, as an educator, that's what we want. We want to get our students, no matter who they are, no matter what the background is, to the point of acceptance. Accept the knowledge. Now, what you do with the knowledge is up to you. I can't tell you what to do with it. I just need you to make sure you have the knowledge. You have the understanding. But what we've seen is, and I don't tell my students this, if you get the knowledge, you're going to want to do something with it. And so there's a 6th stage, and that's what we're seeing when you share this knowledge. That 6th stage is action. These kids want to do, this generation, they want to do something with the knowledge. And that's the great fear, because they want to do something. Inspired by what black folk and black youth have been doing, 2014, Black Lives Matter and the like, inspired by that, but they want to do something. And so that's the fear of what that knowledge activating that, so they're trying to shut it down. If we can keep you stupid and not thinking, then we can keep you from acting.
I would say the knowledge, truth is under attack as well, you know, in the same regard. So I want to shift a little bit, and it's kind of off of what you talked about. You talked about art, and you talk about a target audience. And so that really resonates with me, talking about when you mentioned about Claude McKay and who the audience is. And I think sometimes there's also this secondary audience. When you started out, you talked about hip hop. And so I remember I was introduced to a group that just got a Grammy award the other day, NWA. Isn't that amazing? Because I remember when they came out. And those of you who are aware, you probably know what NWA stands for. But they got a Grammy this past. But I was introduced to that group not by someone of my community. It was a friend that I had that was about 2 years older, named Wayne. And Wayne was from the suburbs, and I remember he introduced me to Ice Cube's America's Most Wanted. So can you talk a little bit about the target audience, but also with the understanding that there is a secondary audience sometimes that can be impacted by the message that's being conveyed through the art form?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, you produce the art, but you can't control who consumes it, right? And one of the things that's also been very powerful, a core component, characteristic of black art, is its universal themes. So it's not a surprise to me, using the example of hip hop or NWA, that hip hop isn't something that is confined just to the black community, right? Hip hop becomes global very, very quickly. Some of the largest concert audiences, not talking about today, but if you go back to the late 1970s, early 1980s, some of the largest concert audiences for that pioneering generation of hip hop are in Germany, are in Europe. I mean, you have brothers from Harlem and the Bronx who are going over to concerts of 10, 20, 30,000 people. I mean, and it's totally off the radar. You can't even get on MTV here, right? But there's a universal element, and that within black art, whether we're talking about hip hop or other forms, we see this demand, this charge, this call, this cry for recognition of the humanity of folk who are oppressed. And that has real power and appeal. And I think it has additional power and appeal when we think about those who might be in a dominant position in the society, and they know something is missing. They know something is not quite right. They know the narrative that they're being fed isn't quite adding up. And so when they're exposed to that art, whether it's in the form of music or painting or dance, it's a key that unlocks something. And they can't go back. They can't go back. It's one of those things that you see, you can't unsee. We teach African American history, and once you open that for our students, no matter who they are, ain't no going back. I teach a course, African American history through film, and because I realized I could get students to watch 4 hours of Netflix before I could get them to read for 20 minutes, right? So I was like, all right, we'll go all in. So I load them up with these documentaries, right? And then we'll watch a major motion picture tied to the theme, right? So they're here for the movie, but they don't realize that they're actually learning through these 8, 10, 12 hours of documentary films that I have them watch each week. And then by halfway through the semester, they're watching these major motion pictures. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. And they're seeing these certain consistencies, right? They'll be like, Dr. Jefferies, we've seen 3 movies, and in those 3 movies, black women haven't had any lines, right? And they'll see it, right? Who are the characters? Who's speaking? And they'll see it. And so then they'll start watching movies. And I had one student, it was very early on, he was like, man, Dr. Jefferies, I really appreciate this class, but I can't watch movies the same anymore. This little white kid, right? And I was like, welcome to my world. Because you can't, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see the lie, you can't unsee it. And I think that is the power of art. Art unlocks that for so many, right? Both within our community, but even globally. It's like, listen, there's the universals, and it resonates with people.
Well, that's an opportunity for me to do a plug. We have a film screening here in this room on the 29th. Where we are looking, it deals with it's called a space race. But we do identify, the art form of filmmaking. And I know there's some people here that, that's a part of their lives in doing that. So film plays a very powerful role, especially today. I think now the young people, it's more like reels and the short videos and things. But it's that form of visual that has sparked the uprising that you've seen in 2020, because it's one thing to hear about it or read about it, but when you see it in video, I recall that time, and there were some videos till this day I refuse to watch. I said I don't have to see it, to know.
But even in that moment, as the videos are hard to watch, because they're robbing the victims, they're robbing us of our humanity, what did we see at the same time but these Black Lives Matter murals dotting the landscape, right? I mean, it's popping up and springing up everywhere, right? In public spaces, not hidden away. That, in my estimation, was the desire to reclaim that humanity, right, in a very visual and expressive form.
So this is amazing. I was actually about to go to murals when you mentioned that. And that's why I had to pause. Is he reading my mind? Because we talked about graffiti. Yeah. And I have this, I believe there's this relationship here in Philadelphia. I mean, you can't go from one block to another without seeing a mural on the side of a building. It was that same way in Cincinnati, and I worked with artists that were there. And this outstanding museum, we have a history of working with a lot of artists, and many of them doing these murals. So can you speak a little bit more about the connection possibly to graffiti and the street murals? And, and most of the artists that I see doing this are coming from the Black community. It's very rare for me to find a white artist that is doing these wonderful, amazing art pieces that are going up on cityscapes.
Well, certainly there's a long tradition of muralism, right? Both within the African American community, but certainly coming out of Mexico and the southeast, southwest of the United States. So muralism has a long artistic tradition. I think what African Americans bring to it is that infusion of history, right? And the messaging and also the desire to have our humanity recognized, right? Not only do we see those sort of Black Lives Matter murals, the words, the language themselves, but what did you also see? These huge murals of Breonna Taylor, the victims, right? So we're not only going to say their name, you're going to see them, right? And so you have that as one aspect of a cry out to the public. But I remember growing up growing up in New York as a kid in the 1970s. So the subways are tagged and marked up, and they'll be nice, but then eventually they'll get, somebody will tag over your tag, and they'll tag over the tag, so it looks kind of chaotic after a while. Around the corner from where I grew up, from my home in Brooklyn, New York, in Crown Heights, there was a sporting goods store called Sill Sporting Goods Store. It's not there anymore, but it was there for decades, right? This is where all the church folk went and got the plaques and the awards, right, from Sill Sporting Goods Store. And on Nostrand Avenue. And on the Nostrand Avenue side was a mural of sort of a Black Hall of Fame, right? Toussaint Louverture, all these folk, right? In the African diaspora. There would be graffiti up until the mural, then it stopped, and then there would be graffiti after the mural, continuing on the next block. And so there was this appreciation, and no, we don't mess with that. We don't mess with, that's different, right? That's our history. That's a call out to the community. That thing was never touched. The sun faded it, but not people. Wow. And I think that speaks to the power of muralism within the Black community as this sort of expression and call out, saying, hey, we're here, we have this history that's trying to be denied, but you can't deny it if you see it. And this becomes a visual representation of that.
Wow. And I'm going to ask two more questions, and then if there's anybody here that we definitely will open it up to the audience for any questions that you may have for Hasan. But I want to talk a little bit about, you talked about the revolutionary spirit that I wrote down. And then even the counter of that revolutionary spirit that you may find in these various different art forms is also the criminalization of those art forms, where it's the banning of drumming. Even though we talk about graffiti, that was considered a criminal act as well. And I guess it still is in many cities. But can you speak to about the contrast of that revolutionary spirit, but as well as in contrast with that, the criminalization of these various different art forms?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you are taking us there, because that is so important. The artistic expression of Black folk has always been under assault. Sometimes it's the drumming, that revolutionary spirit that's captured in the drumming becomes banned. But even that second element of writing, the word, the expressive word, David Walker, who writes this, David Walker's Appeal in 1829. 1829, and he's calling for an armed uprising. He's calling for enslaved folk to rise up. And so what happens with David Walker's Appeal, this pamphlet, it gets banned, right, from circulating in the South. The criminalization, you could be arrested if you were found in possession. So there's a long history of this criminalization. Same thing with, the Crisis magazine. Again, not just political essays, but also art and poetry. Good luck walking around reading a Crisis magazine in Mississippi in the 1930s, 40s, 1950s or even into the 1960s. The NAACP is banned in the 1950s in Alabama. So the criminalization of black artistic expression has deep roots because it's always been political. There's always been this political element, this fear that black artistic expression will revolutionize the society, will create revolutionaries, right? That's part of what the fear of the Black Panther Party newspapers, like, we can't have that circulating, right? It looks too pretty, right? People are getting inspired by it. The art, the appeal. And we're seeing a version of that now. Well, two things. One, I'll get to that version, we'll wrap up there, but you mentioned graffiti. Mm-hmm. The criminalization isn't, the criminalization of black art also serves a political purpose. And so in New York City, for example, when graffiti begins to spread and people are tagging and on the subways and the like, Ed Koch, who would become the mayor for the 1980s, runs on this idea. Now, New York City had all kind of financial issues and all kind of problems, and it was basically bankrupt and all that sort of stuff. And Ed Koch is like, well, it's really the graffiti, right? It's these graffiti artists, these young people running amok, the criminalization of black art. And then the same thing, so sometimes it's generally speaking criminalization of black art, but it's also criminalization of black youth and black and brown youth. We saw that with Ed Koch, and then we get a little break with David Dinkins, and then it picks up with Rudy Giuliani, right, in New York and so many other cities. You got a little tradition of that here in Philadelphia, right, of criminalizing black youth. And so that's part of, those two are connected. Okay. And then lastly, the same, we're seeing it as well now with criminalizing hip-hop artists and looking at their lyrics and then using their lyrics in criminal prosecutions. So they were flipping, almost saying that, no, you don't even have a right to artistic expression. No matter what you say, we can then use that to subvert what it is that you're doing.
Wow. I just want to say, we appreciate you being here today. And, and this was the question that I wanted to get to. If you don't know, Hasan has a brother. He's kind of popular. And with us being the same age and recently, losing a parent, we both share that. And I know that you and your brother, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, I believe have you and your brother going to be speaking, right? Correct? And so can you talk a little bit about, this is a little bit personal, talk about your brother, but also if you could give us insight to the home life that produced these two outstanding, historically significant black men that respectively are successful in their areas and fields. Your brother, in politics and so forth. You as well as an educator and scholar. So can you just talk about, your feelings about that, about your brother, and a little bit about your upbringing? Because that's an opportunity. It's celebration as well when we talk about Black History Month, but it's also a celebration of the family and these dynamics, because we always get the tragic stories. But I think it's very powerful what you and your brother, what you're doing, and what you both of you have become.
No, I appreciate that. So my brother Hakeem Jefferies is a leader of the Democratic Party, and hopefully soon might be Speaker of the House. Right? Depends on how things go. He's cool. He all right,
He all right.
He all right. He all right. So he's 2 years older than me, so that's my older brother. It's just him and I. And as you mentioned, we both have recently lost parents. My father just passed away on New Year's Eve. He was in decline in health, but passed away at age 85. And so, we've been doing a lot of reflecting, right? Both my brother and I about sort of our life journey and how we got here. And I'm glad that you pointed out that the credit for it, we worked hard. Everybody in this room works hard. You're a lawyer, you're a PhD, whatever. You got to work hard to get it. But there was a foundation that was laid that had nothing to do with our hard work, right? We could have worked hard, but without that foundation that was laid by parents and community, there's lots of people who work hard and don't get to where we are in our professional careers. Our parents, my dad and my mom, who's still alive, who were married 56 years. They were married 56 years till he passed away. They were both social workers. And that's important, right? They were both social workers. So we grew up in a household in which service took a priority over everything else. Wow. So they would tell us, my dad in particular, my dad worked with substance abuse. He was a substance abuse counselor, if you can imagine, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, in New York City, in Harlem, dealing with heroin and crack and all this other stuff. They told us, look, and as he's transitioned, my brother and I both were sort of reflecting on sort of these moments in time and the lessons that they imparted upon us and that he imparted upon us. And one of the things that he would always say is look, it doesn't matter. We're going to love you no matter what you do in life after you get a graduate degree, right? That was also, that was a part of it, right? I don't care what it is, there's something y'all going to get, right? You're going to go through, you're going to get that. But he said, it doesn't matter what you do, we're going to love you as long as you're happy with what you're doing and as long as what you're doing is done in service to the people, right? Service to the people, right? If you're happy sweeping streets, we're gonna love you, but it needs to be in the black community, right? They're coming out of our black nationalist tradition, right? For my father in particular, it's no, everything has to be done in service to the people, right? Service to people. So, my brother went into politics, and I went into education, and for me, that seed was implanted in service to the people. That's just you have people in your life, particularly I think at a formative years in your life, and you don't know how they're influencing you, but they are. Just like we have people as a parent now, as a girl dad, and I have to think about the ways that I'm influencing my children and what am I saying and how are they interpreting and am I listening to what they're saying? And so, the parents, they laid the foundation. We owe everything, and they're still teaching until the end. This last thing, my father was in a assisted living at the end, and and couldn't really, he was suffering from Parkinson's and really was bedridden the last couple of months, and so moved him out to Ohio. And so for the last 3 months, he was in this assisted living facility. And I had mentioned that he was a substance abuse counselor. So, he would have days when he could speak a little bit more, but many days, he really wasn't that wasn't very verbal. So many of a half dozen or so of the aides at the facility in which my dad was living, came to the funeral. They were truly moved and touched, even in that short time of 3 months, but daily interacting. And then one day I was back there after the funeral, and one of the aides, she said, I didn't know all that about your dad. He was, at the funeral, obituary, we talked about sort of this history. And she said, I didn't know that he was a substance use counselor. She said, I've struggled with addiction. He was still working until the end. He was still counseling me in his own way. She said, I realize that now. That's what they've been doing is literally until the end, right? Before us, through our lives until the end, teaching in service to people.
Well, I definitely want to thank you. I'm going to, at this time, if we can give a round of applause, I'm going to ask Nina Ball, our Director of Programming, if she can close us out.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I was going to say another round of applause, so let's just go ahead and, yes, for Dr. Jefferies, also for our Executive Vice President, Mr. Christopher Miller. That was such an engaging conversation. You asked so many thoughtful questions. Dr. Jefferies, thank you for offering such a thoughtful presentation and talk within the context of this year's theme, African Americans and the Arts. I especially appreciate how you established the 4 elements of hip hop, then explored an inverse trajectory that rooted them in historical context, which further illustrated the interconnectedness of Black people, art, and our inseparable fate in the fight for autonomous liberation.
Well, that sounded better than what I actually did. So amen to that. Amen to that.
Thank you.